That way. Good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, March 19th, and this is a regular city council meeting. And with us this evening is Boy Scout Troop 326, the Scoutmaster Jeff Finken. And we also have one Cub Scout with us, Foster. And I'd like all these young men to come up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance today. So I'd like everybody to stand as these young men are coming up. Come on up here, boys. Don't be bashful.
He's scared.
Okay. You guys know the pledge. We'll do it all at once. You guys will start us, okay?
Good job.
Everybody, here's the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, young men. And I always like to take a few minutes and talk about Scouts because I was a Scout. And the little guy down there, Foster, I was a Cub Scout. I was also a Lion, and I was a Boy Scout for 3 years. And that's been many decades ago, so over 50 years ago. But Scouts are was a huge part of my life, and you learn leadership and you learn all kinds of community skills, and it's a big thing for us. And you're the young generation coming up that will down the road, guess what, be running the show in another 20 years. And that's a big deal for all of us because we know as long as we got scouting, and that goes for Girl Scouts as well, we are in great hands. So keep up the good work, and thank you for being here with us this evening. With that, I'll move on to our consent agenda.
I would move approval of the consent agenda.
I'd second that.
Welcome back, Arthur.
Thank you.
Art made a motion to approve the consent agenda as is, and Jim Bola made a second on it. I will start the roll with Ann.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. We will move on to the next item, item number 2, which is staff recognition report. Gary, do we have anything, sir?
We have none tonight, Your Honor.
Okay, item number 3, mayoral appointments, and I do not have any this evening with us. So we'll move right on to item number 4, which is public comment and mayor's response period. We allow 15 minutes for the public to speak to us about various issues that are on their mind, as long as it is not something on tonight's agenda or something that is in front of Board of Adjustment and or Planning and Zoning. So if you'd like to, come on up. We give people 3 minutes. We ask that you tell us what your name is and your address. You're making this easy on me. So I will move on to item number 5, which is really one of the highlights of this evening's meeting, and that is the oath of office. Vows, which as our city attorney, which I'm very excited about. And Gary, I will let you lead the charge on this right at the moment.
Actually, Lori will do that. I'll be taking photos, Your Honor.
Okay. Gary has become proficient at photographs, so.
Not really.
So you can face your family. Okay. That's good enough. Okay. And raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution and laws of the state of Idaho,
the Constitution and the laws of the state of Idaho,
and will faithfully discharge
and will faithfully discharge
all the duties of City Attorney of Moscow, Idaho,
all the duties of City Attorney of Moscow, Idaho,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
All good.
Thank you.
Now, Mia, you are official.
Thank you.
And so I'm going to let you say a few words to then address the council and these fine folks here. And of course, you got your wonderful family here with you this evening, which is very exciting as well.
Thank you. It is quite an honor to be here. We cannot always predict the opportunities that will be presented to us, but we can choose whether we have the courage to consider the possibility of something different. 6 years ago, I accepted the opportunity to work for Latah County Prosecutor's Office. I've benefited greatly from the leadership of Prosecutor Bill Thompson, along with the experience of the work that I did as Latah County Senior Deputy. This past December, when Rod Hall announced his resignation, opportunity began knocking at my door. With the encouragement from members of the Moscow Police Department and the encouragement and support from my husband and my children and my family, I was ready to open that door and to allow myself to consider change. I allowed myself to consider serving this community that I love in a different capacity and embrace the possibility of becoming Moscow's next city attorney. I am grateful to the hiring committee for selecting me as a finalist. I am grateful to Mayor Lambert for putting his trust in me to carry out the responsibility of city attorney, and to the council for confirming that mayor appointment. I am excited to be Moscow's next city attorney, and I look forward to working with all of you. Again, I'm truly honored and excited about this opportunity. Thank you.
Well, Mia, welcome to the family of Moscow City crew here, and I've got to share just a little bit about Mia and the interview process. And I've been a manager in a management career for over 40 years, and I interviewed literally thousands and thousands of employees. I couldn't even tell you how many over the years in my management role. And I got to tell you, Mia, and we had some great candidates for this position, and Mia came across, and you kids down there, all the youngins back there, Mia's and Nathan's children can be extremely proud of your mother, because I never seen somebody so dedicated to what she was saying and what she believed in, and I was so inspired by that I had absolutely no doubt. And so I look forward to the many years ahead of us. And I know the work you've done for the county, Latah County, and you've been just absolutely awesome for us. So thank you for accepting the job as well. Does anybody from council want to say anything to me? Well, before we get going on to the next thing?
I'm very glad that you've taken the position, and look forward to working with you over the next few years. It's exciting for me too, so welcome.
Your troubles are just beginning. Look forward to solving a lot of problems with you as time goes along, and I think you're the right person for the job.
Thank you.
Can't wait to see what you do with the office upstairs.
Welcome to the team.
I've only known you as Landon's mom. And so it's going to be really nice to get to know you in a different capacity.
Thank you.
Be prepared for some really dumb questions.
Yep. No, welcome aboard. It's so nice to have you.
Okay, with that, we are going to move on to the next item. Agenda item is Partnership for Economic Prosperity Report, and Dan Ewert is here. Welcome, Dan. We look forward to what's going on with PEP.
Thank you, Mayor. So, good evening. As mentioned, my name is Dan Ewert. I'm the Vice President of IT for the University of Idaho, but I'm here today as the President of the Board for the Partnership for Economic Prosperity, or PEP. Just to remind all of you, although you probably already know, PEP is Latah County's economic development organization, formed through a collaboration of the city, the county, UI, the Chamber of Commerce, and private industry, including Avista. The PEP board consists of representatives of each one of those partners, but really our main job is supporting the activities of our outstanding executive director, our own Gina Terusio. So these activities are multifaceted, but it really boils down to we want to be the resource for economic development in this county, and to be the clearinghouse of information for anyone who is interested in retaining or expanding business here in town, or bringing new business to town and to the county. So most of our focus is on retaining and expanding current business. But we've certainly taken the opportunity to work hard on attraction opportunities as they come out. And we got to make sure that those are right for Moscow or for Latah County. It can't just be that you're trying to attract any business to town. It has to be the fit for all the parties. So to promote transparency throughout our operations, which is really one of our fundamental core values, and to focus on the achievement of our goals, each quarter we do a quarterly report, and we provide that to all the partner members, and actually we'd be willing to provide it to just about anybody that wanted to see it or listen to it. What you have in front of you is the latest finished quarterly report, which is for October through December of 2017, although we will have a new one out soon and you'll be getting that. I'd like to take a few minutes to just point out some of the highlights in the report, but please don't look at it and think that it's the sum total of our activities that are going on. There's so much that can't be captured in a report, but I know that Gina or I would be glad to talk to you about any of those other things and answer any questions that you might have. So the report is organized. It starts with an overview. There's some key metrics that we've decided are good, and those will continue to grow and refine as we mature as an organization. And also provides a status on the deliverables that each one of the founding partners set up when PEP was organized. Each one of the partners had specific things that they wanted to do, but we also found some commonalities. So we'll talk about that in just a second. Excuse me. So just as an overview, and I don't want to read everything here that's here, we did relocate our offices to the Intermodal Transit Center on the University of Idaho campus, and I think that's been a good move. I think it's been very successful so far. We have submitted proposals for industrial properties in support of business attraction. We've signed up our second commercial member in First Step Internet, who is actually working hard to develop our website and the partner websites underneath that for each one of the small cities in Latah County, which is going to be a real added benefit to those small cities that simply don't have the ability to have that right now. It's pretty, as it says here, it's a pretty exciting time in Latah County, and we're pretty proud of that right now. So then if you look at the metrics section, it's real easy to just look at numbers. And it's important to see the numbers. The numbers represent meetings that Gina primarily is having across our county and across our state, honestly, in support of economic development. And those are good things to measure. But they're not the only things that we need to measure. One of the things that we really want to do, and we'll see these numbers of meetings rise as we go out into the counties and have some of these, have more of these meetings with the small cities. But we're also working very hard to develop what we're calling documentation on the economic development ecosystem of Latah County. This county, through the university, through the city, through all the partners, has so much to offer people in the way of information about economic development. Combine that with the information that we have at a state level and even at a national level about how to do economic development, it's an imposing amount of information. We want to be the resource for that information, to help parse that out, to be the organization that people come to, for Gina to be the person that people come to when they're interested in economic development so that they can get the information they need without having to wade through the internet worth of information on that particular topic. As we develop the documentation on this ecosystem, it's going to be extremely valuable for all involved. So you'll hear more about that at the next quarterly report, or read about it more in the next quarterly report. But I think that is going to be exciting. Because understanding all that's available lets us have a consistent path for how we go about economic development and a consistent level of service to the people who need it, be it people in our community or people that would like to come to our community. So I think you'll hear a lot more about that in the next quarterly report. From a deliverables perspective, in the document starting on page 2, there's a set of common deliverables. These are the deliverables that all of the partners decided were important when we formed PEP. We did a vitality report when we started PEP, and a second edition of that is coming out soon. But we're also doing a strategic planning process with the help of MZ. And we're very excited about that because that's going to help not only the small cities to understand what they can do from an economic development standpoint, but our whole county and our city to be able to do that as well. As I mentioned MZ already. We also provide weekly status reports or bi-weekly status reports sometimes when Gina gets to go on vacation about the activities of the organization, and then these quarterly reports. And that constant communication, that transparency in activities was very important when we formed this. And so we're glad to do that. That said, if you look through this report and there's things that you do not see, or there's things that you would like to see change, Gina and I are more than willing to have those discussions with you. Our goal with this is to get the information that all of you need to continue to be the big supporters of PEP that you have already been. To jump to page 3 is that there are 2 specific deliverables for the city of Moscow. The first was to support and promotion of existing and future goals for the Moscow Urban Renewal Agency. That's going to be an in-progress goal, right? But one of the things that we did want to report is that there has been a lot of communication with the Community Development Department, MURA, CETA, City Council, and others in order to promote the projects that are going on. So we want to continue that to be a focus. And then second is to provide the information to the city regarding grant opportunities that are available to the city and to PEP partners. And Gina's working closely with the Office of Technology Transfer on our campus that does a lot of work with grants in that area, as well as other organizations that can help with that. So those were 2 areas that were critical for the city when we formed PEP, and I think we're making excellent progress with both of those at this point. So I'm really proud of what we've been able to achieve. I'm even more proud of what we're going to achieve. I think we have a lot in the works right now. I hope you're interested in reading the next status report that will come out in the next month or so. I'd like to thank you for the time tonight, and I appreciate the support of the City Council, as I know Gina does, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have about our activities.
Well, Dan, I'd like to make a comment, and I'm going to ask for council input here, but the Partnership for Economic Prosperity, when we started discussing this several years back, and it became a reality for us, is so key for our entire county. And of course, Moscow is part of Latah County, and our Latah County are friends of ours as well. So how well we work together as a team, and I always talk about collaboration on multiple fronts, and this is a good example of that, Dan. And as we pull things together and kind of collaborate together, economic development throughout various phases is the engine of growth that we need for our entire county, not only this city, but all the small counties as well. So with that, I'm pretty excited. I'll take questions or comments from council.
I have a question. About retaining and expanding, can you give some specific examples of which businesses in the county or locally that, I understand that everything's in meetings, but
I can't give you specific examples because many times we're in non-disclosure agreements with discussions about those. If Gina has some that she can share, that would be great, but I'm sensitive to much of the information that people share with us about this is their financials, their growth plans and things like that. So I want to remain sensitive to that and that trust that we have with them in coming to us. But Gina, I don't know if you have any specifics that you might be willing to share.
In the year that we've been doing this, it's been everything from I need an accountant to I need some help with somebody that can help me with my website, to, just really basic things, all the way up to we want to expand, we want to hire, 15 more employees, and we need to know where we go to find that workforce, that kind of stuff. So it varies, as you may imagine, every time somebody walks in the door.
And Gina has formed what we call a TAC team, which is a support organization behind PEP that's made up of representatives from all the partners with specific skills. So, our own Bill Belknap is part of that. Jenny Ford, Eddie, a lot of different people are involved with that. So we're able to address questions when they come in. It's certainly in a multifaceted way, not just in what Gina knows, but in the total resources of the community. So I'm sorry I can't provide a specific answer to your question, but I think it's important that we be careful with that.
That helps, and I just I just need a follow up,
Sure,
just
go
to
ahead.
understand. So this, when I came on, this was just getting started, and I realized that you had to start building relationships with community members because they hadn't heard of this before. But we have a 3-year timeline. Is that it?
So we have 3-year commitment and funding from the partner organizations.
Okay.
Yes.
And we're in year.
We're about 1.5 years or so into
Okay.
that at this particular juncture.
Okay.
And so, next year we'll be having that very discussion at this meeting, and hopefully by then you'll have seen a number of quarterly reports. You'll have seen, outstanding progress in many areas that are important to the city, and then we can talk about the further support.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Another point that you had mentioned, Jenny Ford, our executive director for the Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber is a big portion of this too, because there's always this connection with the Commerce Department, which is a big deal for us, not only with PEP, but with the Chamber as well. And we work together frequently throughout the entire state. We never know what won't come in front of us until we try for something, if that makes sense for you. And I always make this statement, we don't know what we can't do because we haven't done it yet, folks. And I'm a big believer in that because we really don't know. And so I'm kind of excited, and I'm looking forward to the day when we really do have some real tangibles and we can say, okay, this is what happened. And I think that will be big for the community and this council as well as our partners. Art.
I was just going to say, relative to the timeline, that it takes a little while to get traction, and just in a year or so, you're just barely starting to get traction. So I'm thinking that in the next year, year and a half, we'll really start to see some tangible results. It's just, there has to be a momentum develop before we really start seeing things happen.
I appreciate that comment, because that is absolutely correct. And we're already starting to see some of those tangibles with the discussions that are happening with some of the local businesses, but they're difficult to see until they really become a reality. And I think over the course of the next year, that's exactly what you will see.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for joining us tonight. I have a couple different questions. So one, so for the metrics for the different kinds of meetings, are those the specific deliverables that's supposed to be contributing to the deliverables of the partners? Is that the purpose of the meeting? Okay,
That's correct.
great. And then as far as the deliverables for the city of Moscow, so when you're finding grants, are you then making recommendations and then the city ends up writing them, or is it?
So we are not a grant writing organization.
Okay.
That's not, our job is to provide another set of eyes out into the various resources that we have that we can point the city or the university or the county or the chamber back to in order to help write those grants.
Thank you for clarifying. And then I just had one more question. Could you tell me a little bit more about the website development? So when you're talking about First Step coming on and then embarking on a website addition to that?
So as we have continued to mature, one of the things that this economic development ecosystem and the ability to have all these resources available becomes more and more important. And a website is an outstanding way to both promote what the county has to offer and link to all the websites that the county already has. But also to have this, and to have this economic development ecosystem present on that. But then it's the real advantage from my perspective is in the small cities. They haven't had established web presences, many of them. They don't have a mechanism to promote themselves from an economic development perspective. And this website for PEP, with these sub-sites off of it for the cities, consolidates all of that information in one place and lets them, gives them a real advantage that they don't currently have. Now, from the city perspective, what we're able to do is to pull all of this information into one place. It's currently distributed in a lot of different places. So First Step came on as a partner, and their job in this is to develop and manage and host this website for us, which is a real, both a monetary advantage for the community, but it's a real advantage for PEP in getting this information out.
Just one more question.
Sure.
Thank you. So that's the second commercial member. Who's the first?
Avista.
Vista, okay.
Avista.
Great.
Paul Kimmel is one of our board members. Avista has been, I mean, obviously, Avista is an unbelievable supporter of our community in general, right? And Paul really has a lot of expertise in economic development and works with economic development organizations around the region. And he brings that knowledge to us and has really helped us to streamline what we want to do.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
Randy.
So I appreciate the challenge of starting and being quite new, and maybe there hasn't been time yet, but I'm curious if you have been able to identify any grants that were brought to the city.
Not at this juncture.
Okay.
Not yet. No, but I think we will, especially in communication with the university, because we have people at the university that are specifically out there looking for grants, and many times they won't be something that's involved with our research, and that way through the TAC team they can bring that to the city.
And Another question. Is the county a partner?
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry if I failed to mention that, absolutely.
Okay,
They are
good.
a partner. Dick Walser is our board member from the county. And, yeah, no, they've, the topic of collaboration that Mayor Lambert brings up is really personified in PEP. When we meet, it really truly is about the benefits of all the organizations, and we don't get hung up in the specifics of, of one organization over another. Everybody really is looking out for everyone else. It's that's a fun environment that doesn't often happen in my job, and so it's kind of nice to go to these meetings and see that kind of behavior consistently applied.
It's called an even playing field.
Yeah. Because what benefits, really honestly, if we were to bring a business into Potlatch, that's going to benefit Moscow. And if we bring a business into Moscow, it's going to benefit Genesee. And we need to think of it in that manner. And I think we are, and because of that, I think we'll be more successful.
You had another question, Brady?
yeah, lastly, I'm on the Urban Renewal Agency board, but I know that a lot of times there are other groups working behind the scenes that I'm not aware of. So, but I was curious about any specific things that PEP has been working on associated with the URA? Any?
So nothing specific. I know that we've answered questions from, prospective companies that would like to relocate about options in their urban renewal districts and things like that, but I don't think anything specific to what you're talking
Okay,
about.
thank you.
But again, those opportunities exist because we've got the right people already part of the organization.
Jim?
I have one question for you. In terms of Vista being, a business partner, have they been approached about initiating a community solar program where they would provide capital to build a solar farm that could be expanded and benefit all the communities in the county as an economic development engine?
I don't know, but I'm excited now to go and find out. So I'm going to email Paul as soon as I get done.
I saw someplace that somebody done the calculation, and if we could identify 500 acres that we would put that on, we could completely supply the city of Moscow with electricity. So maybe that's a number you can take to them and.
Intriguing. I don't know that those discussions have gone on, but I'm going to find out for you, and I will get back with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Haven't gone on.
Yeah?
Yeah, does working with Whitman County fall under the scope of PEP in any
So
capacity?
from a partnership perspective, yes, they're not an official partner of PEP, but WSU and the Port of Whitman, the county, and the city of Pullman, they all have resources here too. And that's part of this ecosystem concept, is understanding within our region what's available. Obviously, we're focused on what's available in the county and our state first, but those resources are 8 miles away. And we want to make sure that those are available to prospective partners or prospective companies as well. So it's in the scope, but it's not our focus right now. Our focus right now, Gina, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, please, but our focus is really on Latah County and the resources that the state offers to us.
It would be remiss as an economic development organization, however, if we ignored 8 miles away. It would be remiss. So I am aware of all that's available, or a lot that's available over there. Mapping that ecosystem will really help us know as well, and then we have that in our toolbox. But right now, we need to figure out what's going on in Idaho. That's our
Yeah,
focus.
Chamber has amazing activities, Palouse Knowledge Corridor has amazing activities, we have amazing activities. We need to make sure that those are moving in the same path, right? We don't want to stop creativity or anything like that, but we want to understand what it is and what we have to offer.
And one of the things that adds to the power of this is folks from EMSI that can help us identify these things. They have a bunch of bright people there that can really zone in on things for us, and I think that's a big thing for PEP and for our area.
Just for a little more background, so when you all were beginning to put this together, are there other models out there that you kind of cherry picked from? or?
There's nothing exactly like PEP, which is okay because there's nothing exactly like Latah County. But yes, to answer your question,
Hey, after
that
all,
wasn't meant to be a negative, by the way.
Excuse me,
I
Dan.
consider that a positive.
let me interrupt something here. Latah County is the only county that took an act of Congress to make it a county in the United States. So yes, we are unique,
We are
ladies
unique.
and gentlemen.
All right, no, I consider that a good thing. Yes, there were models, and in fact, as we continue to evolve, Gino's worked with a number of different organizations. I'm sorry, I'm thinking
CEDO.
Twin Falls, CEDO.
CEDO, that's-
Is
yeah.
has been a good model for us. Some of the things that organizations offer, we're incorporating. Others, we're recognizing. That's probably beyond our scope and our capabilities right now. So let's put those on the parking lot. Let's put those in phase 2 and work from there. But yeah, there are models out there, and CEDO, I think, is probably the most prevalent one that we've looked at and used.
You might want to mention too about MZ and their partnership from day one. They were a big contributor of their software and all of that data for us from day one.
MZ's provided data and access to software. They've provided Gina the opportunity to go to training and conferences to better understand how to utilize the data. They were a big part. The data was a big part of our vitality report that I mentioned. And now with them involved in our strategic planning process, I definitely see a long-term partnership with MZ.
I do too.
Other comments for Dan? Excellent report, Dan. Thank you very much. We'll be looking forward to seeing the next thing, the next quarterly report from you folks and measure, see how we're going. So
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay, with that, we will move on to item number 7, comprehensive annual financial report presentation. Sarah Banks is somewhere here. Sarah, are you going to come up and Nick? Or is Gary doing this? You are it, okay. Come on up, don't be bashful. This is known as the CAPR, which is the acronym. I went all the way out to the instead of saying CAPR, but this has got a lot of meat to it, so
It
go
really
ahead,
does.
Sarah.
Yep, so as you know, and some of you may not know, I'm Sarah Banks, the Assistant Finance Director for the city. And this is Nick Nicholson, who is our auditor from Fresno Gage. And we're excited to present tonight our 2017 annual CAFR. There's a lot of work that's been put into this, and so he's going to do an overview to let you know how the city did in 2017. So, here you go. Thank you.
I'll get this set up here and hopefully I choose the right one.
Welcome, Nick.
Oh, thank you. Hey, I got it first time. Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I guess I've only one new face, I think, from the last time. And so I'm Nick Nicholson. It's great to meet you. And I'm from Fresno Gage. I can't remember how many years we've now been doing the audit for City of Moscow. It's been quite a few years. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to work with you. And we had another good and successful audit with Gary and Sarah, and we really appreciate the work that they put in during that time as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of
Go ahead. Just interrupt you for 1 second. We actually have 2 new counselors, Ann Zbola here and Brandy Solomon down at the end that have.
Okay, I guess I'd
joined us,
met
so-
Brandy on the URA for several years as well. So
I
she
think
said
I
that,
may have
but-
been here when you did the report at the end of the year
Okay.
too, and I was appointed to finish John Weber's term, perhaps. But yeah.
Okay.
Yep, fair enough. So, okay, so I will kind of dive in. Obviously, big, thick annual report. I do not wish to delve into every page because we do not have that much time tonight, and I would not do that to anybody. So I'm going to try to hit the highlights, some of the key points, and I'll give you a chance at the end if you have any specific questions for me or Gary or Sarah. So what is a CAFR? It's basically a comprehensive annual financial report. Annually, it's an audit with some additional information. A CAFR is basically governed by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board and the GFOA, which is the Government Finance Office. Basically, they require a few additional things beyond basic financial reporting in order to report a comprehensive annual financial report. And the report, basically the biggest deal behind the CAFR is that it is a report that the GFOA really delves into and goes into deep, and they give a certification of financial excellence on that report. And the biggest benefit to you guys is it is a report that allows you to get better rates when you go out for bonds. And that is the biggest benefit to you guys. And so over the last several years, the ability to get that certification year in and year out has saved the city a lot of money when you guys have gone out for bonding. So that is the primary purpose of doing the expanded report. In an audit, I kind of like to go through what is really the responsibility of all the partners involved here. The city has a responsibility. We as auditors have a responsibility. So your guys' responsibility is really the documentation and the accuracy in reporting, your own internal controls. That is your set of internal controls. That's your duty to watch over that. And then actually the preparation and presentation of the financial statements. That's a common misconception that the auditors create this report. Really, that report is your report. It is information that you guys see on a monthly or bi-monthly, however often you meet. That information is what is presented to you. And really, our only responsibility is to express an opinion on that financial information as a whole. And so that's really our responsibility. We have 3 opinions that we put on the financial statements. One is on the fair presentation of the actual financial report. The second is on the governmental auditing standards, which is your internal controls over financial reporting and compliance. And then the last one, which is not every year, is the Single Audit Act. We had that this year, and basically what that is if you expend over $750,000 in a year of federal financial assistance, so federal grants, loans, if you spend that much money in the year, we have to test your major federal programs and issue another report on that. And that we did have that this year with a few of your major projects that you got through federal dollars. So those are the 3 opinions that we have. And as a good note, all 3 opinions came back with what we call unmodified opinions, which people ask, unmodified, that seems like you're copping out a little bit. But that is the report name, basically, that we are governed to say, and it is what we call a clean opinion. Basically, nothing rose to the level where we felt that there was anything misrepresented. There was no internal controls that we felt that were lacking or were not being put in place over the financial reporting, and you're in compliance with all of your statutes. And then on the Single Audit Act, you were appropriately expending and overseeing the use of those funds. So that is the kudos. And so with that, basically that is the extent of what my report or our report is a clean opinion. So with that being said, we'll go into some of the highlighted details of the financial information on here. So here's some of the just kind of financial highlights. At the end of the year, the city's government-wide net position, basically you'll see 2 terms throughout this. There's net position and there's fund balance. And many of you have heard my spiel of what the 2 different kinds of financial statements are in this. For any newbies, there is 2 basic sets of financial statements. One set is on what's called a full accrual set of financial statements, and that's where you will see the government-wide net position. And what that is that's a set of standards of accounting that treats the records kind of in a business-like manner. You will see your statement of net position is your balance sheet in a business world. You've got your assets, you got your liabilities, you capitalize your equipment and you depreciate it over its life. You have debt that you put on the balance sheet, and as you pay it down, it changes your net position that way. It is really not how you operate your general, governmental accounting. It's more of a business-like type, which probably coincides, or it does coincide more with like your water, sewer, garbage fund. It makes more sense in that arena than it does your general fund, Parks and Rec, which is in the second set of financial statements, which is a modified accrual, and it's more of a budgetary style basis. Basically, you budget that I'm going to expend $100,000 on this project, and when you spend it, it's out of your resources. And that topic, your fund balance is the terminology there. So that's why you'll see the two different terminologies. Net position is business-like, full accrual, fund balance being modified accrual and more of a budgetary style. So the net position for the government-wide is about 6.9 million. That's an increase of about 6.66% from the prior year. The biggest increase in that is really due to the accumulation of current projects and the accumulation of funds for future projects. So you guys have been doing some pretty big projects and planning for some future ones in the water and sewer area especially. And so that's the biggest area of increase in your net position, or basically your equity, if you like that term better. In the governmental, this is non-business related, governmental restricted fund balance. These are basically funds that you have in your governmental arena, your water, or not your water, but your general fund, your parks and rec, those items. You have some funds that you're not allowed to touch. Basically, they're restricted for a specific purpose. Those restricted fund balances total about 3.1 million. They consist of about 78,000 for debt service, just under 300,000 for highway user fees. Those have to be expended in a certain manner. And then the biggest one, just under 2.8 million, is the Hamilton funds that are still required to be spent for cultures and recreation. In the business type, water, sewer, garbage, your restrictions for net position total about 15.6 million. 14 million of that is for future capital projects, and the other 1.6 is for your future debt service. There at the bottom, you can see kind of a chart of the total government-wide operating expenses. Basically, that's how much it costs to run the city of Moscow for the last 5 years. You can see just kind of a steady increase as you would expect. And these operating expenses do not include your capital outlay, which basically means your capital assets, your projects capitalized, and the inter-fund transfers back and forth. So we excluded that. In the audited financial statements there, it really, governmental auditing standards require you to kind of speak to the big items, I guess, so to speak. So what it considers to be the big items are your major governmental funds. The major governmental funds for you guys are general fund, street fund, parks and rec, capital projects, and Hamilton. Basically, that is a numerical calculation of the size of those funds, how much activity. If they are 10% of your total revenues, expenditures, assets, liabilities of the governmental funds, or 5% of your total government-wide, they're considered to be a major fund, and so those are your major funds. The non-major funds you can see are your other 1912 Art Fund, the Moscow School Fields, and those type of things. And then enterprise funds are your business funds, water, sewer, and garbage. So the general fund is really the probably the most scrutinized fund, as it's your operating fund. Basically, it's the fund that catches everything that isn't required to be captured somewhere else, and it's your biggest fund, and it's the chief operating fund of the city. Special revenue funds, basically they're everything that is required to be, the proceeds are basically received for a specific revenue or a specific expenditure purpose, and they're legally restricted to be spent for that purpose. And here's some of your special revenue funds. Here is your governmental operating. This is your general fund, your streets, and your parks and rec. These are kind of your general operating major funds. Here's just kind of a representation of the fund balance over time. You can see your general fund, generally it kind of ebbs and flows as you guys go through major projects and those type of things. But you can see the streets, they've all really kind of kept pretty normalized over the last 5 years. Parks and Rec has grown a fair amount due to the Moscow school fields and those type of programs that have been implemented. But and this is the fund balance as well. So as you plan for future projects, especially in the Parks and Rec street funds, those fund balances will rise and then flow out as you expend them. Basically, what is your general government expenditures? I'm going to show you a chart here, basically comparing your general government to other areas, but your general government is just your legislative, your executive, your administrative, finance, legal, kind of what it takes to operate the city from the inside. And then you have public safety, which is your police administration, your dispatch, fire control and prevention, those type of services. And so you can see here the general fund revenue over time kind of has flowed with the increase of that. And basically your revenues for your general fund are primarily property taxes. There's some highway user fees go into those type of things. And then you can see here kind of how that is absorbed. The general government generally tends to rise. Actually, this year your expenditures in the general government went down slightly this year. Public safety actually rose to where you were almost a break-even general fund this year. I think it was like a $9,000 net increase. So basically, you spent what you made this year, and so that's what that is a representation of. Another one of your big areas is your cultures and recreation, your parks, your swimming pool, the HERC. 1912 and Art Fund. And here's kind of a representation of how those have been spent over the year. Year 2013, you see that one looks kind of like an aberration. That's the school fields. Basically, that's when those were constructed. So that's the amount of Hamilton monies that went to the school fields there, you can see. The street fund, another one of yours you can see here. Kind of a representation of how much expenditures are funded by revenues, and then the revenue line to the top, revenue plus transfer in, is basically what other funds are contributing into the street fund, and that includes water, sewer, garbage, those other government funds. In the enterprise world, this is really your water, sewer, garbage. This is your business type activities. Basically, if it's charged a user fee, it falls under the enterprise funds. It has a different accounting treatment than kind of the budgetary style that I was talking about. It does run more on a business style basis. And so we'll go through kind of each of those individual funds kind of just as a representation. You see, you got your regular expenditures and then your capital outlay. Those are your capital projects. You can see in the last couple of years, your water fund has undergone some very large capital projects. And so you can see over the last couple years, your fund balance probably in the water fund has dwindled a little bit as you've saved for 13, 14, 15 for these major projects, and now we're seeing those go out.
That's well number 10 in the booster station project.
Yeah. And so you can see here as the net position, which includes those capital assets, you can see that as you have spent more and purchased more, your net position has increased kind of as those projects have gone into service. And then you can see that the net position for the capital projects has actually gone down as you've spent those monies. Sewer, really the capital expenditures have been minimal in the sewer fund. You have been accumulating, getting ready for some sewer projects. And we'll see that here in a second. But you can see your expenditures and your revenue have been pretty steady in the sewer fund. Not a lot of change there. And you can see obviously you're building up in 16 and 17 for from some future sewer capital projects. That's where your net position is increasing. Sanitation, obviously it's been pretty steady as well, and it's a pretty healthy fund. You can see that the revenues have continued to keep up with expenditures, which is a good trend to have in the government world. So, and you can see that the sanitation fund has continued to increase the net position, kind of set aside for those future capital projects as those may occur. So with that being said, I didn't delve into too many of the individual numbers. Obviously, that's probably not for this meeting. But is there any questions for me, or?
We may have some for some of the, because it was, this is pretty intense. It's about 140 pages
Yeah.
of information I poured over the weekend, and I pretty well understand it. But questions from council to Nick?
I had a question.
Okay, Catherine.
It's on packet page 230, but it had to do with the transit center, and I just wrote why variance. Again, this was a huge document, so I'm not even sure if my notes.
I do not, do you have a copy of
I mean,
that?
230. I'm almost there, hold on.
Yeah.
230, hold on. And I just, again, just trying to understand the,
And is that I don't actually have the packet, but
I
is
can
it
talk about that.
yeah,
the
okay,
expense
good,
versus
I found it.
budget?
Yeah, it's on page 230, Transit Center. Schedule of revenues, expenditures, and changes, and it just says variance favorable, unfavorable. I just wanted to understand what was going on.
Variance was because when the transit center was being billed to the University of Idaho in a certain fashion, we went back, rebuilt that because parts of it we weren't able to substantiate. So it took us some time to do that, and I believe all of fiscal 16 went by without collecting fees. So those were billed and made up, I believe, in January.
And when you say substantiate, what do you mean in accounting terms?
Well, you'd have to ask the accountants.
So when he says you can't substantiate, what do you mean?
In regards to what he's talking about, when she's asking about the contract. So when the university and the city of Moscow were looking at the contract, there were some discrepancies that they couldn't determine what the issue was. And so Gary was working with Dan on a contract that everyone could agree on that made sense, that we had the numbers for. So that when he's saying substantiate, he's just meaning the numbers that we can provide to prove what the contract needs to be.
The wording on that is a little bit kind of confusing in a way, because what you got is for under charges for service, you got a budget of 32,000 and then an actual 16,362, and then you got which would be a credit of 15,638, but it says unfavorable. Well, it's really a
Right.
credit.
Well-
And so the terms that we use are just a little bit tweaked.
No, yeah, that 15,000 is actually the variance. It's just showing how much of the budget wasn't
Spent.
Used.
correct, and that has to do
Right.
with the contract not being finalized until after the fiscal year. So this next year, you'll see the transit center catch up, and actually, it will be the other way. Next year, when you're looking at the budget to actual, it's gonna be over because we will receive funds that are not budgeted for fiscal year 18.
Okay.
And those will be for previous years.
Thank you for answering that.
And some of the terms are just a little bit, they're different than regular accounting terms if you're in a business or doing a home budget or whatever. It's just different lingo, so.
Thanks for that. Thank you. That was my only question.
No questions.
You do?
No.
Yeah, Martha?
Nope, I'm good.
Jim? Ready? We're good, Nick. Thank you
Well,
very much.
for having me. And it was a pleasure working with, and I always like to give a commendation to just the staff here. They do a great job. They're great to work with, and really appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys, so.
One of the things with numbers, and I've done this for years, I mean, the more numbers you talk about, the more glossy-eyed people become. Because it's like, it'll almost put you to sleep. It's like, what'd you say?
Yeah.
Type of a thing. So I appreciate the abbreviated portion of it, but I actually appreciated the detail on this too. And I think this is good for all of us, especially counselors and new counselors, as we work towards our new budget that we're going to be working with and have here in 4 months when we have our budget workshop. So it's just a little bit more understandable. So anyway, thank you, Nick, very much.
Thank you.
Let's see.
For the finances,
We
everybody
need
left.
to.
I think it's commendable that Nick was able to keep the Boy Scouts here enthralled for the entire time of his presentation.
Well, I guess
It was the end of the show.
we do have an action that we need to take
Oh,
with acceptance of
of
this.
the, I find it.
Your Honor, I move that we
Thank
accept
you.
the City of Moscow audited comprehensive annual financial report for 2017 as presented.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion by Gina and a second by Catherine to accept the City of Moscow audited comprehensive annual financial report for FY 2017 as presented. I will start. Any questions before I going. I'll start the roll with Randy.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Well, before I say aye, I did want to just note that the report was really interesting, and for all those people that we've had that have questioned the process, I just want them to note that there are several pages within the beginning of the packet that just go into copious detail about how everything is done, and so I just appreciated that. Aye.
All right.
Aye.
In other words, folks, we watched the purse strings pretty close. So thank you very much for that. We will move on to item number 8, 2017 Commission Survey. Gary, you going to introduce Trevor, or are you going to? We have Gary here, and this is kind of an exciting thing. I don't know how many of you got a chance to read through this. I like numbers, and so here's some more numbers.
Sorry.
Thank you, Your Honor. What we have before you today is let me get the computer up here. We have the 2017 City Commission Survey. Survey, as you recall, we've done a citizen survey biannually since 2002. So in that survey, we always had a series of questions that we would ask as base questions so we can measure the performance of the city over a period of years. We're currently, I believe the next survey will go out this fall, citizen survey. As that survey grew and the questions, besides our base questions, our measurement questions, the commissions were allowed to put 2 questions into the citizen survey, which unfortunately grew the size of the survey to about close to 10 pages long, 8 pages, that sort of thing. When you have a survey, having a certain amount of returns is what makes your survey viable for statistical purposes. So you can imagine some people, if they weren't that interested, they get an 8 or 10 page survey. The sheer bulk of it makes it end up in the wastebasket. So we looked at the utility of asking our base questions, thereby reducing the size of the biannual citizen survey, and then perhaps giving an opportunity to the commissions to have a separate survey that goes out in the off year from the biannual citizen survey. This is our first attempt at doing that. It was developed by the commissions, Jen Piffner, the Assistant City Supervisor. The Assistant City Supervisor position has typically been tasked with the survey instruments. Jen engineered the survey with the help of our intern, Trevor Memmott, who will be presenting tonight. Jen is just getting back from Hawaii, so you can give her a break for not being here if you so desire. I'm not sure I'm going to. But be that as it may, this was the first shot at giving the commissions, I believe, 3 questions apiece, Trevor, which expanded what they wanted to know a little more. Some very interesting things came out of the survey. Trevor will talk to you about some of the statistical analysis, what sort of confidence interval we can gain from the survey because of the response rates and those sorts of things. So without further ado, Trevor's going to go ahead and lead you through this, and thank him very much for his work. Trevor is an MPA candidate at the University of Idaho. He's been with us almost a year, closing in on it, right? So he's done outstanding work, and I think this is a good example of that work. So, Trevor.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon, everybody. As you said, my name is Trevor, and I got about 39 slides, so let's get started. So just a little background. The general goal of the survey, I think, is a little different than the citizen surveys in the past. At least from my perspective, I think citizen surveys are generally used to kind of gauge how citizens feel about the city. And the commission survey was a little bit more policy-based, wherein our commissions represent different aspects of policy, and they all had a question about that aspect. So should be put to good use in terms of strategic planning, city decision-making, specifically commission decision-making, resource allocation, and policy assessment. So the research instrument was similar to the citizen survey. We sent out 1,200 surveys, which is the number we always send out. We got a 27% response rate,
So that was 324 respondents in total. That response rate is a few percentage points lower than the average that we're used to, but the questions were a lot more complicated. So if you adjust for that, I think 27% is pretty good. And so, yeah, and that's enough to establish statistical confidence. Every single question that we asked had a high enough response rate that we can give our answers with statistical confidence. And then, yeah, this survey will serve as a benchmark for future commission surveys. So hopefully we can establish some trends in the future. So these are a list of our commissions. You probably all know them, probably don't need to read them, but so each was able to ask 2 to 3 questions. Some asked 2, some asked 3. And some questions were extremely long and some were short, so let's start going through them. So we start out with fair and affordable housing. The first question just asked, what are your future housing needs? Respondents were able to check more than one box, so we had 4 responses. 57% said affordable, 52% said location, and 42% said appropriate features and right size each. And then we asked what residents wanted to see out of their next home. So I know this table's kind of complicated. The numbers that stood out to me, 68% said they agreed or strongly agree that they want their home to be adaptable so they can age in place. So I think that's a good sign for Moscow that people are wanting to stick around and have that as a concern for long-term living. Respondents were split on the use of cars. It was about a third of people agreed or strongly agreed. They didn't want to require the use of a car. About a third were neutral and a third were disagreed or strongly disagreed. So I thought that was interesting. And then overall, residents like the idea of being within walking distance of amenities. So, and then the third question they asked was a time frame for moving. Our largest response was, I don't plan on moving. So again,
Let me ask questions. There we go.
yeah, sure.
Okay. So on the one where you said a third of the respondents are neutral
Right.
with the car,
Yeah.
they
but-
actually say like, I mean, you answer neutral?
Yeah. Yeah, we had from strongly agree to strongly disagree, and then neutral in the middle, and about a third.
It's about cars.
Yeah, about a third were neutral on the requirement of use of cars. So,
Okay. All right, that's just bizarre to me.
yeah.
Lies, damned lies.
Okay.
So then, continuing on the trend of what I think is a good sign that people like to live here, our most common response by far was that people don't plan on moving. 41% actually said they didn't plan on moving. Another 12% indicated they wanted to move after 5 years. So combine those two together, it's 53% that are planning on staying here for at least 5 years. I think that's a good sign. And then on the other hand, we did get a pretty even distribution of people. So I think that's also good for like a representative sample, that we had a good distribution on both sides of wanting to move in a short time period, probably students or young professionals and people that want to live here for a lifetime. This one's pretty straightforward. Just asked, the Farmers Market Commission asked who attended the farmers market. We got 81% said they did, 15% said they didn't. So that leaves 4% that didn't answer. But I think 81% of respondents is a pretty good sign that our farmers market is healthy. And then we asked them the reason for attending the farmers market. Again, they were able to answer more than one. Another good sign is that 73% said that it was to purchase local produce, so they're actually going there to buy stuff. And then I think another sign to take from this is that the social environment that's been crafted on the farmers market is one that's productive. I mean, 31% said visiting with friends, 25% said musical entertainment, 23% like to people watch. So I think that this is a good sign that economically the farmers market's doing well, but it's also creating a social environment where people really want to go hang out downtown on Saturdays. This one is it's hard to put on a PowerPoint. It's a little harder to see. But this asks satisfaction with various aspects of the farmer's market. The things that people were generally satisfied by were hours of operation, location, cleanliness, variety, quality, live music, and interactions with farmers and producers. And then, not surprisingly, the issues that people were more skeptical about, including pricing and parking availability. So I think that might be something that the farmers market wants to consider in terms of parking, how we can provide more parking for people, bump those numbers up. All right. So next, the Historic Preservation Commission asked, when they make roadway improvements, essentially, should we keep in mind preserving the historic integrity of the neighborhood, especially in historical neighborhoods in Moscow? And 37% strongly agreed and 37% agreed. So this is one of our more popular questions. Most people do think that that should be a concern when building new housing and making infrastructure repairs. So the next question was from the Human Rights Commission, and they simply asked what questions that citizens would prefer to see them address. And they can mark more than one. Leading answer was homelessness, followed by poverty, then access to health care, bullying, and racial discrimination. So I found this question pretty interesting. I mean, at least personally, things like homelessness and poverty aren't things that I associate with Moscow, but it is, I think, important to keep in mind that these were what people marked the most. So these are issues that are affecting people's lives. Moving on, then they asked what respondents had personal experiences of discrimination. Most respondents said they had none. They were also able to mark more than one on this question. So our highest response was 14 said they faced gender discrimination. 12% said they faced discrimination on the basis of religion. And 7% for wealth or social class. And you could see the other numbers. Again, if there's any questions, feel free to stop me.
So is this, I have a question. Yep. So is this talking about just experiences in Moscow, just in general, workplace, anywhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. So we had a question from the Moscow Arts Commission that asked how citizens hear about cultural offerings. 64% said they heard it from word of mouth, which I think is another testament to the sort of communal aspect of Moscow, that's a pretty high percentage of people that are hearing about things just from engaging with each other. And I think, so social media was 41%. So I found that number interesting for two reasons. One, just that local newspapers was 39%. I found that really interesting that local newspapers are still pretty much at the same rate as social media, even with the growth of social media. And I think the second part of that'll be interesting is just to see how that develops and grows if we continue to do this survey and that question continues to be asked, how much more social media will be involved.
Excuse me?
Jim's got a question.
I wonder how much of social media and word of mouth overlap there is.
Yeah.
How many people perceive what they see on their
Right.
Facebook, Twitter account as word of mouth.
And
maybe some overlap there.
Another thing I thought of too is you don't know if local newspaper means print newspaper, or they're going to the website directly, or they're clicking a social media link. You know, if they can click through the Moscow Pullman Daily News on Facebook, so that might be a part of those numbers too. So, but yeah.
Interesting.
So then they asked, did you attend the following performance art activities? 64% said they attended the Farmers Market live music performance. That's not really surprising since people are downtown anyways. 44% said they had attended entertainment in the park. 30% for the Art Walk music stages, and 10% for the Moscow Arts Commission band. So then the Moscow Pathways Commission asked about issues that citizens felt regarding the Moscow's pathway system. We could see that both street crossing safety and lighting were considered priorities for citizens, and as we'll see later, the most common suggestion for the city was improving safety at intersections. So that is not a trend that we've seen as much in citizen surveys, but it's a trend that came out in this report a couple of times. So that's something to consider. The next question asked how frequently trail sections were used. The most popular sections in Moscow were the Paradise Pass sections from 6th Street to Highway 95, as well as from Chipman to 6th Street. And then the third most popular was Leta Trail to Troy. But all the pathways were relatively popular, so I think that's a good sign that we have a pretty active community. Moving on to Parks and Recreation. In a testament to the Parks and Recreation Department, we didn't have a single respondent say they strongly disagreed that Parks and Rec provides adequate programs and activities. Yeah, that was pretty impressive. Out of 324, not one. 16% strongly agreed, and another 46% agreed, and just 4% total disagreed. So those numbers should inspire confidence in Parks and Rec. And they asked which age group would benefit from more activities and programs. Results are pretty clear that people want programs for younger people and older people.
Hey, us old guys need a little bit of activity too. So. So the highest highest age group was 13 to 17, which I found kind of interesting. That I guess that high school age group. That's a interesting number. The second highest was 65 to 74-year-olds, and then the third was 5 to 12-year-olds at 23%. Next is the Planning and Zoning Commission. The next three questions were pretty complicated. They were all pretty thick paragraphs. But despite that fact, their response rates were 94%, 95%, 93%. This question asks if citizens believe that public and private colleges and universities should be allowed to apply and receive conditional use permits to operate in the central business district. And 62% said yes, and 32% said no.
I have a question about that.
Brandy?
So I did look at it earlier, but if you could, the way the question was worded, did it specify additional educational uses versus existing, or was that not
I
specified?
don't believe so. Let me grab it real quick.
I didn't think
The
it
way I
did
see it,
either.
the educational uses should be allowed with the central business district through a conditional use permit.
Yeah.
That's how I.
Wasn't additional.
Right, so it
Also did say
wasn't
not
asking
additional.
how people feel about
Had nothing to do
additional,
with
it was
what
just,
Just in general.
Yeah.
okay, that was my understanding, thank you.
Yep. All right. So then the next question asked about this concept of tiny homes. Let me get back to my
I
notes.
was kind of intrigued by this, Trevor.
Yeah, it
80%, that's kind of an interesting, and these are 400 square feet or less houses.
Yeah, they defined it as generally a home of 400 square feet or less in size, which is constructed on wheels or a foundation.
I don't know how you would, well, obviously, that must be people that, there's more than one in a house. I don't know how in the world I'd ever get along with anybody, or they could get along with me. If I only had 400 feet. That'd be kind of a tough thing to get around. Art?
I've got a question here more for Bill. Does the current zoning ordinance permit tiny houses?
So tiny homes are permissible as a residential structure on a foundation. If it was on a chassis with wheels, we would consider that to be a recreational vehicle, and that would have to be placed in an RV park. But if you were to place if you wanted to build, I mean, there's no minimum size of home that you need to construct on a lot in the community. And if you wish to build one that's 400 square feet, you could.
As long as they fit within the square footage of what our plan says. In other
As long
words,
as the
R2.
lot met the minimum lot size and you
Right.
met the setback requirements, that would be permissible. And if you wish to do what is more commonly seen as a tiny home community, where multiple on a single lot, then you would have to go through plan unit development, but that'd be permissible as well.
So Bill, if you live in a trailer, but that's not a tiny home,
Not technically. That's a manufactured home by definition.
and it doesn't sit on a foundation, but some of them do?
Some do, but they are inspected and constructed to HUD standards and have a HUD certificate, where a tiny home is just constructed and typically does not have that standard, and is just built using typical construction methods and practices.
Oh, okay, thanks.
I have another, sorry,
Right.
this is just so interesting, like, there's a thing with the containers that they're retrofitting to be like tiny homes.
Yes.
Where does that fall? Because it doesn't have a foundation, but it doesn't have wheels. What's that?
They can be placed on a foundation.
Okay.
And if you place it on a permanent foundation, that would be permissible in any residential zone that we have today.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay, I was just kind of, this tiny home thing kind of intrigued me.
The next question addresses the city code. I thought that was pretty interesting too. So this one, and just 79% approved of providing tiny homes as an affordable housing option, and 16% didn't. So the next question, so the Moscow City Code puts restrictions on the number of homes that are allowed on a certain size property and the number of off-street parking spaces for automobiles that are required. Because tiny homes are smaller than typical family housing, the commission asked if residents would support amending the public code. That would make it so that planned unit development wouldn't have to go through public hearing and get approval from council each time they wanted to build a tiny home. So that was the basis of this question. And 59% said yes to amending the code. 34% said no. I think just a caveat to interpreting that no number is that if you don't support tiny homes in the first place, which 16% in the last question didn't, I don't think you would probably support amending the city code to allow for this. So that's just one thing to consider in the no portion of this question. But yeah. Any questions about that? Okay. Moving along, this is from the Sustainable Environment Commission. It asked if residents supported a pesticide-free park and/or buffer zone around children's playgrounds. Pesticides has been kind of a common concern in this community. 31% strongly agreed and 36% agreed. So the vast majority is in support of these pesticide-free parks or buffer zones. The next question they asked was citizens' general concern about climate patterns on the Palouse. 41% said they were very concerned. 27% were concerned. 9% were somewhat concerned. 9% were neutral. And 10% were not concerned. If there's no questions, moving on to Transportation Commission.
You know, I think, I'll make one comment on that, Trevor. I think right there is a good indication, as looking through the total numbers on the surveys, you have roughly 30, 66, 73, you have 94% that took this survey that either had some college or an associate degree or bachelor's degree or professional degree or graduate degree. And so I think that is a reflection of it, because I think our community is on top of being smart about climate changes and climate control and all these different factors, not only here on the Palouse, but everywhere in the world. I think it's, that's what I just thought I'd put that point out.
I think so too. So the Transportation Commission asked about the bike share program. The bike share program is a service that the city of Moscow is considering, wherein the city would provide bicycles at stations throughout the city that would be available for short-term rental through a daily, monthly, or annual pass. 25% strongly agree that they would like to see a bike share program. 31% agreed. So it's relatively popular. It's a pretty clear majority. So I think this will be definitely, I've done some research into the bike share program with Jen, and I think this will be something that we strongly consider in the future. So, moving along, this question asks which transportation system investments that citizens feel are the highest priority. And they were able to mark all the questions. The highest priorities were maintaining roadways, safe arterial crossings, and roadway improvements to ease traffic, as well as safer and more accessible sidewalks and intersections. The Tree Commission, I believe this is our final commission. This question asks, I support the city's efforts to enhance Moscow's urban forest by, and they gave a number of choices. They were able to mark more than one. The choices were drought tolerance info in the street tree selection guide, which 64% said they'd like to see. Working with adjacent landowners to plant street trees was 65% said they'd like to see. Planning for a replacement of aging trees through planting, got 76% response. And developing a food forest, 46% responded they would like to see. And then this one asks which publications and workshops citizens would like to see the Tree Commission offer. 60% wanted a publication about selecting trees appropriate to Moscow. 59% wanted a publication and/or workshops on water-wise selection of trees. And 52% want publications and/or workshops on proper tree planting. So now we'll get into the demographics of the study. Here's our employment and enrollment trend measured with the citizen survey over time. In terms of employment, for whatever reason, 2016 seems to be an outlier year. If you take out 2016, all the 2017 numbers are just about the mean of 02 through 2014. 29% that responded were not employed, 18% were part-time, and 50% were full-time. So it's a pretty consistent trend. And then same with enrollment. The trends were pretty much the same. 83% weren't enrolled, 3% were enrolled part-time in school, and 12% were full-time students.
One wonders if having another category on employment called retired would be beneficial.
Yeah.
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 Well, Art, you bring up a good point, because when you look at this, I got the stats here somewhere, 21% or 16% were 65 to 74, and 8% were 75. So you had 24% that were over 65 years old
Right.
that took this,
Right.
completed the survey.
That's why they want more programs at Parks and Rec for that age group, right?
We need more. We need curling.
So then we also track residency numbers. Again, these were pretty consistent, although this survey was the most responses we had of people that lived here for more than 20 years. So again, I think that's a good sign. I think that trend's moving in the right direction, where people are living here long term.
Yeah, I got a comment to make about that too. If you look at that, if you take the lived here 11 years, more than 11 years, and more than 20 years, you got 59%. People that were 6 and to 10 was 10%. So that's right there, 69%. That's a huge number. I would think the things that they're talking about here would be pretty important to those people, because they're people that have been here for a while, some of them for decades.
I agree. All right, and this is, Mayor touched on this. This is the education level. The red and the orange are the biggest pieces of the pie, and that's a good thing. The red is graduate professional degrees, and the orange is bachelor degrees. 36% had graduate or professional degrees, and 33% had bachelor's degrees, for a combined 69%. Moscow remains one of the best educated cities in the country. And in my view, I think that's our biggest strength. Yeah. And then, like, when I was looking at, when I did a comparative analysis early in the year, I looked at our education level compared to every city in the country, and we're at near the top, so. And then we looked at income levels. The numbers, again, have stayed relatively consistent. The one number that's continued to grow is people making over 100,000 or more, which is obviously a good thing. Especially if you take away the recession, which I think is The 1 year you see the numbers falls between 2008 and 2010, which makes sense. Other than that, we've seen consistent growth in that number. 35% made 50,000 to 100,000, 21% made 25 to 50, and 17% made less than 25. The race or ethnicity, age, and gender. Our race and ethnicity numbers track the census. That's pretty much what we see year to year. And then, yeah, the age numbers were relatively consistent. They skewed a little bit older, as you would expect, but overall they were relatively balanced. We got a pretty good distribution of younger people and older people. And then 52% of female respondents and 42% of male respondents, and that's a number that has been consistent going back to 2002. It's usually 8 to 10% more women take the survey than men for whatever reason. Voter registration and habits. Again, these numbers were pretty consistent over time. And then, of course, we have the consistent trend of more people saying they're going to vote in the next election than voted in the last one.
No, they don't.
But yeah, those numbers stay pretty consistent.
I wonder if that's a guilt thing.
I think this whole question is, I would take it with a grain of salt, because obviously 64% of our population didn't vote in the last city election. So, yeah, I think there's some shame involved.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because it's a presidential, the next one's a presidential election.
There you
So
go.
that's
90%, so they're voting in the next general. So, and then we asked a unique question this year about transparency. This was not a commission question, but a citywide question. So there was three questions that were graded on a Likert scale. The City of Moscow openly shares information. The City of Moscow is accountable for the decisions it makes, and then the City of Moscow regularly asks for public input. I think these numbers are pretty solid. All had about 50% agreeing or strongly agreeing. That's not to say that we can't improve, and I think we should try to make that disagree and strongly disagree category as small as possible. But I think as a cohort, we're generally seen as relatively transparent, which is a good thing. Yeah.
When people respond neutrally,
Yeah.
which has happened, how does it make you start looking at the question, or?
Well, maybe they're just
Not
okay.
just this
They
one in
don't strongly agree or agree. They're just fine with life or something. Who knows?
No, but I mean, when we craft the questions, in terms of, getting a neutral response, does that have to do with the question that we're putting together?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I definitely think that's something to consider each year when you're drafting the new one. I think that the goal would be to have that neutral number be small.
Really small, like
Yeah.
that. That's why I was like a third for the cars.
Yeah.
Doesn't even make sense that we'd have neutral response.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's because they're okay. Who knows? I mean,
But okay is not neutral.
maybe it is. Me, in your eyes, it's not, but maybe in 10 other people it is. I mean, that is a personal how you.
And I would say if you
interpret
go
yourself.
back and look at the citizen surveys, there were some tougher questions in this one, some more confusing questions because the commission wanted to ask something specific. But if you go back to the citizen surveys, they have similar rates of neutral responses, and most of those questions are pretty straightforward.
Really?
So I think that people do consider that a legitimate response.
If I may, in a typical Likert scale statistical survey, neutral just means you don't agree with it, you don't disagree with it.
Right.
You feel that
So
you
you'd
don't
be
have an
okay with
opinion.
it. So it doesn't matter to you.
Yeah. And of course, when you've got don't know on the other end, it just means I don't know anything about it, so I don't have an opinion for that reason.
Either.
At least,
Yeah.
I always consider neutral to be at least an informed opinion, even though they don't agree or disagree with the.
Well, the don't knows
Positive.
could also be that group that's been around for less than 2 years or really don't know because they haven't been around long enough to form an opinion on it one way or the other.
And on these particular questions, neutral could be that they're thinking, well, in some instances, I've agreed, and in some I've disagreed, so they wipe each other out. I've felt both ways depending on the topic, right? I'm not, I guess what you're saying is there's a lot that's left unknown with a large neutral
Right.
chunk like that. We don't know what that means.
Yeah, we don't know what that means.
Yeah.
All right, so that is the end of the questions that we asked, and then we allowed for open-ended comments, and here's just kind of a summary. I grouped them the best I could. The most common answer was safety at intersections, as I discussed earlier. 13 respondents had that concern. 11 was to fix potholes, which is a consistent complaint. 10 was snow removal, which I think was partially due to the being conducted in December. 10 responses were against the 3rd Street Bridge, 8 were Christchurch influence, 8 were clean energy, and then as you go below that, you can read some of those, getting down to just 1 or 2 complaints. I do think an important thing to note here is something that the mayor and I were talking about earlier, that if you think about the 324, I think was the total number of people that took this survey, the number of complaints are relatively small. I mean, even 13 complaints about one issue is about 4% of 4% of responses. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Not that there aren't things that obviously the city could do better, but I think
you make a good point, Trevor, and you know, there's always things we can work on, and there's always things we can improve, and we will chip away at doing that all the time. One of the things I found kind of interesting is 3rd Street Bridge. 10 and the snow removal, that represented 2.9%. And interestingly, the multimodal plan, when it came out, when you read through that and you read all the statistics in that, it was a 3% that wrote in on the bridge there as well. So it was kind of an interesting thing. It just struck me because numbers, I like to fool around with the numbers, but I thought that was rather interesting.
especially with the 3rd Street Bridge being such a big issue this year. I mean, if you lived in Moscow and paid attention at all, that was something that was on your radar. So to only get 10 responses, I think that like we discussed earlier, the letters to the editors and the people that show up to meetings and are the loudest aren't necessarily representative of the population as a whole.
Yeah.
So.
I like the brewery district.
Well, that's a question. There's one didn't like him, I guess, sorry, so
Maybe they were in favor of it.
Well, they could have been
Yeah.
in favor of it, like establishing.
They were.
a
They
brewery
actually, yeah,
district.
they
Oh,
were.
well,
Yeah,
there
they
you
were
have it.
Asking for the creation of
He's
a
the
brewery
only one who
district.
answered it.
I didn't get that survey. Disclaimer, wasn't me.
All right, so that's
Safety,
it.
I have a
Oh,
question.
sorry.
For safety at intersections, did respondents specify if they were concerned about pedestrian safety?
It was, yeah.
was?
That was
Okay.
generally the concern, yeah.
And a statistical nerd question, you say that it was statistically significant. At what level was it significant? Are we talking 95%?
95%.
90? Okay.
Yep, and all of our questions passed that threshold. Most had pretty high response rates.
So it's not like ag econ where you have significance at 20%.
No, 95%, yep.
Well, I think that commission surveys as well as citizen surveys of the significance and importance of these, and I like them because I like to see, and I think we all should like to see what people are thinking. Simple as that, and I think that makes that makes you know if you're okay on the right track, that you're moving forward, or if you're way off somewhere on kilter or whatever. And a lot of those numbers were very similar to what the citizen survey said the previous year.
That-
You
yeah,
go
that-
through
that part really
statistically and
surprised
look
me.
at the percentage of it, is amazing. And so I thought that was rather interesting. So,
If I may.
you're-
I think the 95% confidence interval that Trevor talked about is very important as well. With 1,200 surveys, I think you can go down to about 17% and still maintain a 95% confidence interval. To get anything above that, 95%, you have to double and triple the size of the survey.
Huge, yeah.
In order you get a big enough survey sample so that it's statistically significant. So I guess if you can depend on these answers to be right 95% of the time to be representative of the community's views, that's a pretty good survey. And I want to take the opportunity, too, to thank Trevor for all of his work on this, the commissions, everybody who participated, council, members of the commissions, liaisons, Jen Piffner. This is a great undertaking, and for the commissions to get that kind of feedback is just an incredible tool.
Yeah. Randy, you had a.
Oh, yeah, I was kind of curious about the feedback. So was it that this is going to go out every 4 years and the
2 years.
City
2
one
years.
every,
So-
okay,
so
so
we're gonna have
every
one-
year, there's gonna be
Yep.
either the city or the commission one.
Yep.
So then, so the results of this will go to every commission, and then presumably they talk about them and think about how they might wanna tweak their questions the next time or
Yeah,
change
yeah,
things,
so I
or-
think that'll be good, this is the trial run, so, and a lot of the questions were really long, so I think that we'll see some changes, but, it'll also be good to get trends on some of these questions, especially to get the more complicated questions, then get trends on those, I think will be really, really interesting, so.
So will it be up to the commissions to decide if they're gonna use the same question the next time, or
Yeah,
just?
my presumption would be that they're kind of encouraged to, but.
Yeah, you want to have that baseline, but unlike the city, which is trying to, some of the questions we ask in our biannual survey is, how safe do you feel in your neighborhood, so that we can go from year to year? And another interesting part of this survey is, if you read the survey, it's taken from different sectors of the city as well. So the commissions can look at those. If they get certain responses out of a certain sector of the city, say regarding trees, they can focus their efforts perhaps in that sector of the city. So there's some really good tools involved here, but my anticipation, as you saw, some of the questions had to do with issues of the moment, like tiny homes, historic neighborhoods being impacted by roadway design, those sorts of things. My suspicion is those issues will change over the next 2 years, and the commissions will be able to change those if they like.
More questions?
Trevor, thank you. Excellent report. You did a wonderful job on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we are going to move on to Moscow Urban Renewal Agency 2017 Annual Report. Bill Knapp is here to present. Hello, Bill.
Good evening. Thank you, Your Honor and councilors. Let me turn the mute off. So tonight we're here to present the 2017 Moscow Urban Renewal Agency Annual Report. As you have heard this in the past, in accordance with state statutes, all urban renewal agencies within the state of Idaho are required to file an annual report every year describing the activities the agency has undertaken in the preceding year to the local governing body that is the enabling entity for that urban renewal agency. For the Moscow Urban Renewal Agency, that is the Moscow City Council, and this is the 2017 report that we're providing to you this evening. We could just file this, but we also like to make this presentation to the City Council so the public is also aware of the activities of the agency and provides a good opportunity to highlight some of those as we move along. The agencies are required to hold a public meeting to report the findings of the annual report, and we conducted that meeting at the agency's March 1st meeting. We did receive one public comment. Victoria Seaver was there, and her comments are included in the draft of the report that is in your packet this evening. Victoria helped some editorial as well as some inspirational work on the annual report, which was greatly appreciated. So tonight we're doing the presentation to the City Council for the Council's reception of the report. The report itself is outlined, and I'm just going to show some page screenshots, but not go through a lot of the details. But this is the cover of the report, highlighting a couple of projects the agency has worked on over the last year, including the Gritman's new medical office complex in the south end of the downtown, as well as the Identity Project. Those are two fairly large projects the agency partnered with public improvements and environmental remediation in the 17 calendar year. The annual report starts off with a little bit of a profile and background of the agency when it was created, which was in 1995 by the agency by Resolution 9508, and goes through a little bit of a description of the makeup of the 7 members of the Board of Commissioners of the agency. Also includes a little bit of a summary of tax increment financing, which is the mechanism by which the agency funds its activities. That is, when a district is formed, and this little graphic kind of helps illustrate that, when a district is formed, there is a base valuation that is set in that district. The only current district we currently have that is active is the Legacy Crossing District, so that base valuation was $47 million in the 163-acre district when it was formed. And then over time, as the agency as value grows within that district, the tax levies of the taxing districts are applied against that new value, come to the agency. The agency uses those funds to make public investments in largely public infrastructure, environmental remediation, brownfield remediation, to help facilitate that development. That helps grow that tax base. And then at the closure of the district, which is now limited to 20 years, that full valuation is then returned back to all the taxing districts to levy against. We highlight the Board of Commissioners for the 17 calendar year. This was our board. It included Steve McGeehan as chair, Brandy Sullivan as vice chair, Art Betke as secretary, and then Ron Smith as a commissioner, Steve Drown, Dave McGraw as our county commissioner representative on the board, and then, of course, John Weber, who served as commissioners in 17 and passed in that year. We highlight 5 different significant achievements for the agency in 2017. The first of which was the adoption of a strategic plan. The agency spent just about a year working through and developing a 5-year strategic plan to help guide the activities and focus of the agency. And that included a 5-year capital improvement plan to identify public improvements and investments the agency wished to undertake in that time period so that we could plan for and accumulate funding for those activities. The second was the development of a new agency website. The prior website was somewhat antiquated, and we did not have all of our records available. We updated the website in 17, and now all the agency's public records are now open and available for the public's review on the website. The agency completed the environmental remediation on the 6th and Jackson property. That was a long effort over the course of about 3 years to remediate a prior ag fertilizer contamination that existed on that site. And in April of 2017, we received our certificate of completion for the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality and our covenant not to sue, clearing way for that redevelopment of that property. We also contributed to a number of other community projects. As the council is aware, we contributed $27,000 to the downtown restroom project. We contributed $10,000 to the Latah County, or the ITD's Latah County paving project for some sidewalk improvements in front of the current Nissan dealership property on the Pullman Road. We also contributed $15,000 towards the Steiner White Highway 8 underpass project, and another $87,000 towards the 3rd Street corridor safety improvement projects that the city recently received funding for Phase 2. Carrying from Jackson to essentially Llewellyn Street out the Pullman Road corridor. The agency also partnered with $40 million in private development projects. Those included the 2 largest were the Gritman Medical Center project located in South Main, as well as the Identity on Main project. We also partnered with sidewalk improvements associated with the Stacks reconstruction and the Varsity Diner project as well. So those were our most significant projects. As well as the improvements at 3rd and Jackson. The partnership between the city and the agency to improve the alignment of the turn lane, as well as make streetscape and utility improvements along the 6th and Jackson property. The annual report goes on to cover the districts of the agency. In the history of the agency, there have been 2 specific urban renewal projects. The first was the Alturas Technology Park. And the agency's, that district was closed in 2015, but the agency continues to own 6 lots in Phase 2 of that project. And then Legacy Crossing, as I mentioned, 163-acre district, which is our current active urban renewal project in the city. So in each of those, we probably a little bit of background, and I showed that earlier graphic with that base valuation and showing that valuation growth over time. So this is that same chart showing the growth and valuation in the Alturas Technology Park District. Again, starting off at just a little bit, about $6 million of base valuation at the start of the district in 1997, and then growing over $22 million prior to closure of that district in 2015. The agency was able to close that district a year ahead of schedule in 2015 and return about $850,000 of tax increment revenues back to the taxing districts when that was closed. Legacy Crossing was formed in 2008, which unfortunately, yes, sir.
I'd like to interrupt you for just a minute on the Alturas Technology Park. From when it started, I just want to remind council and everybody out there that that's where MZ started, was in the Alturas, and they outgrew that, and now they're right downtown. And they're continuing to grow and grow and grow, and that is sometimes how these developments can come along. We never know, and that's a wonderful firm to have with well-paying jobs, and they're going to end up down the road, they're going to be a 200-employee operating business. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Very true, very true. As I mentioned, Legacy Crossing was formed in 2008, which was right about at the peak of the recession, so we saw less activity occur since the formation of that district. However, we do expect to see that change. That 40 million in private investment we'll see hit the tax rolls, and that valuation, which had a base valuation of 47 million at the time that the district was formed, that value had grown to 59 million by 2016, and we expect to see significant growth in that valuation in the coming years as well. So we do feel that Legacy is just now starting to see the activity that we really anticipated seeing back in 2008 before the recession had other plans. As I mentioned, we completed the remediation on 6th and Jackson and partnered with the city. So the site previously, which housed the Otto's Produce and some other warehouse buildings, the old Sac warehouse, that has been cleared. The environmental remediation has been completed. The turn lane, frontage improvements, the lighting, the brick accents have all been installed. And that site is ready for the next phase of development. Within the state statute, we are required to identify any real property the agency holds and what's our intended use of the property. So we do have an inventory of the 6 lots in Alturas, as well as the 6 in Jackson property, which has not yet been conveyed. So those are the 7 individual properties we hold. The 6 lots within Alturas are readily available for sale. So if anybody's interested, please send them my way. And 6 in Jackson, the agency just recently approved the development and disposition agreement with Sangria downtown, and we expect to be moving towards closing here in the near future on that property. We do have within the document all of the financial statements. You can't read those on the screen, so I'm not going to go through those, but I do have a couple graphs to show some of the information of the financials of the agency. So Nick gave you kind of an overview of net position and fund balance. We'll talk about that here briefly, but not in a great level of detail. But this shows you the trends of net position of the agency. The orange line identifies the unrestricted, the green is our investment in capital assets, and the bottom line is restricted for debt service. You can see that in 15, prior to the closure of Alturas, net position of the agency that was unrestricted was about 1.7 million. We refunded $850,000 of those tax increment revenues, and so you saw that net position decrease substantially during that time of unrestricted resources there for the agency, but that is the reason for that sharp decline between 2015 and 2016. Although the district was closed in 15 and those funds were dispersed during the FY16 fiscal year, and so that shows that big change. The capital assets have varied a little bit. It's at the close of Alturas, the agency had capitalized the public improvements and infrastructure the agency had constructed on Alturas, and those were conveyed to the city's books in the 16 fiscal year. So you see a decline there. Here is just really the capital investment the agency has placed into the 6 in Jackson property for environmental remediation and other improvements into the site. And then anything restricted for fund for debt service dropped with all of the debt was retired for the Alturas district in 2014. And we just carried then the fund balance required for the bonds that the agency holds for the 6 in Jackson property. So as you look at the overall distribution net position, again, unrestricted at the close of the 17 fiscal year was 814,376 in capital assets, and then the 44,000 in the restricted for debt service line item. Agency revenues, again, this is the Alturas revenue, so near the closure of the district, annual revenues in the Alturas district were approximately $400,000 per year. And with the closure of that district, that went to zero, and that district no longer receives any revenues. Within Legacy, we had some change. So obviously from the formation in 2008, then you had the first year of 09 where we had little to no increment. That increment then grew up here in 2012, and then it was identified that there was an error in the accounting of the increment valuation with the states and the counties' accounting software. That resulted in a reduction of the increment valuation, and then since 2013 we have seen this growth. 15, 16, 17 were fairly flat, so we had little activity happening, but beginning in 2018 that increment value is growing, and that's the budgeted value based upon the preliminary valuation. So we saw a $3 million increase in valuation from 16 into the 17 tax year, and then we expect to see a much larger increase as we move into the 18 tax year. That will affect the valuation increment growth going up in the FY 2019 fiscal year. Yes.
So you know when we changed Legacy Crossing to come out, does that, we're talking about moving?
So we're talking about expanding the district
yeah.
to
will that
include
change,
Main Street.
Will that help
It won't change the increment, but the base valuation will change slightly, but it will not reset the base.
Oh, okay.
So we will not lose increment valuation. In 2016, the legislature did make an amendment that stated that any plans adopted after that date that where the plan was modified or amended would result in a reset of the base valuation, but it did provide a exclusion for any existing plans that existed prior to that, to the 2016 calendar year.
Okay.
So it will not affect that.
Good.
With regard to the properties in Alturas that are still owned by the URA, what's the property tax situation on that?
They're not taxed because we are an exempt entity. So there's no tax increment or no taxes being paid on those properties. When the agency moved into phase 2, there were some land use restrictions the agency placed upon the property that were above and beyond the zoning restrictions that exist within the RTO zoning district. Those were prohibited from being amended for 12 years, and that time period is coming up here this upcoming spring. So beginning in 2019, we can reevaluate whether the agency wishes to retain those restrictions upon the property. So currently it is very tightly restricted to just really technology-based businesses, and that is really the only entity that can develop in any of the lots that the agency currently holds. That has been in place for quite some time, and we've had very little interest in the properties. The district, has been closed, the project has been closed, and so I think the agency will be working with other business and property owners within Alturas to reevaluate that coming up this spring. If that occurs, we expect to see more interest in those lots, but based upon the current restrictions, it really has dampened interest in development and purchase of those lots. Our agency expenses, again, you see that same peak here in the 2016 fiscal year for the Alturas Fund, so that is largely of the $900,000. $849,000 was the disbursement of excess tax revenues that the agency had accumulated over the last couple of years of that district, and so those were refunded back to the county to be dispersed back to the taxing districts. And so we received no new revenues on the Alturas district, obviously, with it being closed. Revenues for Legacy Crossing, or I should say expenses for Legacy Crossing, had been fairly flat up until 2015. Then we began the remediation work. And so that's been really the bulk of the expenses that the agency has incurred over the last several years has been related to the environmental remediation on that property. Those have been reimbursed through an EPA cleanup grant. So we received approximately 90% reimbursement for those expenses on that project. And we've seen some investment again into that property. Overall general agency, which covers the general operations of the agency, previously the city and the agency shared the executive director position. It was a half-time executive director with the agency, and it was a half-time economic development specialist with the city of Moscow. Jeff Jones was the last individual to hold that position. Jeff left in the 2015 time period, and so we did see a reduction as the executive director services were wrapped into the city services agreement. So for a long period of time, the city has provided a number of services to the agency, financial accounting, as well as general administrative, limited legal services, engineering and planning services from the community development engineering departments. And the agency has reimbursed the city in amount approximately $30,000 per year for those services. Beginning in 2016, we also included the executive director services, and that agreement was that the fees associated with that agreement were increased from $30,000 to $45,000 to include those additional services, and that has resulted in a reduction of general agency operational expenses for the agency since that time. As we look at the Alturas Fund, again, we had fund balance that had been built up here before the closure of the district, and those funds were then expended out. And the fund balances then were zeroed out. So with the closure of the district, Alturas no longer receives any revenues. The Legacy Fund itself has built up some fund balance, but we've seen these expenses over the last 3 years related to the environmental remediation, the frontage improvements, as well as other participation in private development throughout the district. So we have seen those expenses increase. 18 is based on our anticipated budgeted numbers, and we do have some fairly large expenses we'd identified related to the Sixton Jackson property. We have some debt that we'll have to pay off on that property. We have the Hello Walk construction and some other projects. So we are expecting to see some somewhat high investment expenses in the 18 fiscal year, and that was dropping our fund balances down. But we are seeing these revenues increase, and we expect to see those substantially increase here over the next 2 years as well. Fund balances, Alturas with the closure was zeroed out and refunded back to the taxing districts. Fund balance in Legacy has been growing, but we do expect to see those expenditures here over the coming year. That'll drop our fund balance down a little bit. And general fund has just been holding steady, covering our fund balances required for the operational expenses of the agency. Yes.
Didn't we need to retain a small amount, maybe it's in the general, for, if there were some expenses associated with our tourists, like landscaping or something like that, right?
With Alturas, we did set aside $45,000 at the closure of the district for, it was anticipated to be $9,000 per year for 5 years we have some maintenance obligations on those 6 lots we hold. We have some advertising and marketing expenses that we incur with those lots. So we did take funds from the Alturas and put it into a restricted general fund line item to help pay for those expenses as they occur. And so those are part of the general fund balances.
And on the slide that showed the Alturas expenses, we just haven't had to use any of that in 2017?
They're not coming out of the Alturas fund any longer. They're coming out of the general fund.
Thank you.
And so I think we had just under 4,000 expenses last year. We do have an agreement with the city to have the Parks Rec Department do weed control and mowing on the lots, and we pay for that expense. That's probably our largest expense for Alturas that we've had recently. But those are now coming out of a new line item that's created in the 17 fiscal year for Alturas maintenance, because with the closure of the district, the auditors wanted to have those funds moved out of the Alturas fund, and it was placed in a restricted line item within the general fund. So that's why you do see a little bit of a bump here in 16 in the general fund balance, and then we've been expending a little bit of that out over the last couple of years. Long-term debt trend for the agency in the 15 fiscal year, the debt associated with the Alturas district was paid off, and the only remaining debt that we've had has been the bonds for the Six and Jackson property, as well as, I think included in here is the repayment agreement with Latah County for that error in assessment. The agency did receive some revenues for a couple of years that we should not have received, and we were repaying those funds back to the county over time. And so both bonds and that long-term county repayment are included in that number there, but we do see that number declining. So with that, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have. And after that, request that the council accept this annual report.
Questions for Bill?
I have a question about the identity property. Somebody had asked me about their parking, and so I went in and talked to them. And I was wondering how the Urban Renewal Agency helped them figure out parking with the university. That's what they told me. They talked to the university.
The agency was not a party to that. The agency just worked with identity on the environmental remediation and highway access improvements.
Okay.
So the agency itself is not related to the project or to any land use approvals they may have received. The agency just worked with them on the remediation of the Sharp property that was a prior petroleum distribution site.
Right.
And then as well as any highway access improvements needed to gain access there. Identity initially only owned the property to the north of the Sharp site and was going to gain access across the Paradise Path in the driveway that exists in that right turn lane. Mm-hmm. And we did work with them to encourage the acquisition of the adjacent vacant Sharp property, do the environmental remediation, get the access to the signalized intersection to avoid that pathway conflict. But that was the extent of the agency's participation on the project.
And anything else that they do is just them working with the university?
If they have any relationship with the university, that's between them and the university. They did come through with a planned unit development approval through the Planning and Zoning Commission with a parking reduction mitigation plan. And so they did receive a reduction in the off-street parking required for the project because of its location, bike parking placement, 2 zip cars that are required to be on site. So they did mitigation for on-site parking. Mm-hmm. I don't know what relationship they may have developed with the university.
Okay, thank you for your help.
Other questions for Bill?
I just have a statement. Bill, this URA is an example of how it works and how it works really well. And I think you ought to give a seminar to the rest of the state on how to do this, because you have the answers and it's there, and the detail is just very, very impressive. And hurry up and get the Southeast Moscow Industrial Park going.
That's next.
Patience is not one of my virtues. Sorry.
Okay, I move to accept the MURA 2017 annual report.
Second.
Ann?
Sure.
Okay, we got a motion by Catherine and a second by Ann to accept the Mura 2017 annual report. We'll start with you, Ann.
Aye.
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 Okay, very good. Thank you, Bill, very much for a wonderful report. Next item is our FY Year 18 Local Strategic Initiatives Program Grant Award. Les McDonald is here to share some great information with us. Good evening, Les.
Good evening to you. Glad to be here. So the item before you relates to a grant program that came up this last fall, and we're happy to report that we are moving forward after successful selection within the program. Since not everybody was here at the time, we'll take a couple minutes and run through a little bit of the history of what we're doing before we ask you to take action this evening. So the grant program actually was put together, as I mentioned, in the fall of 2017 as part of that surplus eliminator program. There were a couple of things that came out of that at the state level that we have applied for. But the program essentially split some of the excess money that was in the state budget, 60-40 between the state and local projects. So we would be in that 40% section that we'll be talking about tonight. This particular project, actually two of the items, the grants opportunities, are related to maintenance and also are preferred to address safety and mobility in some fashion. They can only be used on existing roadways and bridges. And here's the fun part is that once you sign the contract, you must be ready to go out to bid within 90 days. And that was done intentionally because they wanted these to be as close to shovel-ready projects as possible. They also wanted to demonstrate that if there were funds being put to this type of use, that they could be done so efficiently and quickly. So thus the 90-day period to put it out on the street for bids. There is no local match requirement, which certainly makes it a little easier on our part. They will cut us a check for the project. If we do not use all of that funding to complete that project, we are supposed to then return the excess to the state. The maximum amount that was allowed within this particular grant program was $1 million, with one application per municipality on the program. The proposed project that we did submit in the fall was essentially part of our 2018 pavement management program. It is for the slurry seal project that we had anticipated doing this year, but this will then allow us to use the state funds for this purpose and then apply the city monies to other such projects within the pavement management program.
I have a question.
Yeah.
One project per municipality in perpetuity or per year?
This is
Forever.
a one-time deal. And if there are other programs in the future for surplus eliminator, I would assume they'll use a similar technique.
Right on. Thank you.
So as mentioned, a slurry seal project this year, about 260,000 square yards of streets within the city. We were successful in obtaining that grant through the good work of Elisa Anderson, our grants manager, with some assistance from the engineering staff and Public Works. Grant received for $477,450. It's a very nice, tidy sum to bring into the program. And to talk a little bit about what we're going to do with it, this is a map that shows some of the previous areas that we have done slurry seal projects dating back to 2011 in the redder ones. They're kind of here. Then we did another set in 2013, which are kind of the orange colors there, and those areas. And then 2015 are the greenish ones. There's a few limited spots. That was a smaller one. And then in 2017, the ones in blue, which almost looks purple on this particular graph, quite a few in the 2017 program. For 2018, which will be the subject for this particular grant, we're focusing on 3 areas of the community. It's labeled here, 1, 2, and 3. Just zooming in on those areas a little bit. Area 1 is on the west end, so there are some portions that are not quite on the map out here on A and War Bonnet. But zooming in a bit, you can see Farm Road, A Street, Baker, portions of that area on that northwest quadrant, a little bit of 6th Street heading down east of the campus. On the next area to the south, and this map is turned so that north is to the right in this case, just to help orient you a little bit, we're looking at the Sunnyside Avenue areas, the south view, and then some of the Indian Hills sections of the community. And then Area 3, again, north to the right, a little more of 6th Street, portions of Hayes and Polk on the north end of town, kind of jogging our way up through that area. Mountain View, F Street, D Street, quite a bit of the community. So we're hoping to see some improved road conditions throughout the community based on this project and the funding that is being received through the grant. And that is essentially it. Pretty short and sweet, and something we're very happy to be seeing. The request this evening is that the council accept the grant award and essentially execute or authorize execution of the state-local agreement for that $477,450 for the 2018 pavement management program.
Art had a question?
Yeah, what's the nature of the slurry seals? Is it traditional tar and pebble, or is it the more recent type that we gave some trials to over on D Street?
There are probably 3 different types you're talking about there. The traditional tar and pebble is a chip seal. That is not what we're doing. The one that we did as a trial was a rubberized chip seal, where you take a chip seal, tar and pebble, and you add a rubber component into it. That had good success for the most part, and some limited problems due to some application issues that they had. They have since repaired that. What we're talking about is a slurry seal, which is a little different animal. It's a thicker product. It's got a different rock configuration to it, and it is the type of thing that it fully encapsulates the rock rather than the rock sitting on top of the asphalt emulsion. So it binds much better. It allows a bridging of fractures in the asphalt that's underlying. So we're able to use it in roads that are in poorer condition than you would use on a chip seal. But it also really, it doesn't bind as well as a rubberized chip or expand quite as much. So it's kind of in between. Gives you a much better riding surface. It seals the road really well. And part of the reason we use it in our program is we're trying to preserve those roads that are in a better condition in good condition. And so that's why you see them on a lot of what would be probably newer, higher quality roadways, because we want to keep them in good condition.
Thank you.
And you actually answered where I was going with maintenance, was the particular roads and why they were chosen, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, well, I
Randy.
have a question about that too. So were the, those same roads already identified before you got the grant because you were, or did the selection of the roads change in any way?
Actually, they did not change. When we do these programs, there's a certain amount of work that has to be done in advance. And you'll see our crews out there sealing cracks in the roadways.
Yeah.
It's called crack sealing. And those have to be done before you do this type of a surface application. So we program these a good year in advance and have the crews out working on them. So then when we go out that next summer, we've got a good slate of streets that are ready to go for this type of application. So these were ones we'd anticipated.
Les, doesn't that also encompass how you come up with the cost? Because this is a grant for under $1 million. And we went for 477, so that must have been part of the equation to figure out what it would cost to do these various areas.
That is correct. And there was some discussion when we made the grant application about, do we go to something bigger? You can go up to $1 million. Why not ask for something larger than the 477? It was driven by how many of the streets are currently ready or could be ready by the time we would actually get to application, keeping in mind we got that 90-day bid window. Right?
Yeah, makes sense.
So we really worked with those that were pretty much ready to go, a few that we'll touch off this spring, but they'll be in good shape and for the project.
Randy?
So then is the goal to have it all completed this summer, everything you put up there?
Absolutely. One contract.
great.
It actually will go pretty quickly. You'll probably see that contractor come through when they do that slurry seal. They'll be here in about, I imagine, 7 to 10 days, give or take, of operations. They'll finish that up. It's very fast.
Okay.
Okay, I move to accept the Local Strategic Initiatives Grant Award and execute the LHTAC local agreement for $477,450 for the 2018 Pavement Preservation Program.
Second.
Okay, Jim beat you.
He did.
Okay, we have a motion by Catherine and a second by Jim to accept the local strategic initiatives grant award and execute the LHTAC/local agreement for $477,450 for the 2018 pavement preservation program. We'll start the roll with Brandy.
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you, Les, very much for that. Okay, Gary, we're weaning down here. We have a 2018 city limits ordinance correction.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is the Idaho state law requires that every year the city must file with the State Tax Commission an ordinance of the city limits. Typically, if it does not change, we still send it down saying that it has not changed. We had an annexation last year, the Montgomery annexation out on A Street. Throughout that huge 5 or 6 page legal description, the Montgomery annexation was included in ordinance 2017-15 passed by City Council on December 4th. If you look on packet page 312, page 5 of 9 on the ordinance, one line from the bottom, the second line up, you will see that there is a small legislative change where a north and south coordinate was placed. Obviously, you can't have a north and south coordinate. It's got to be going one way or the other. So that was picked up. Actually, we sent it down with the mistake. State Tax Commission picked it up and said this has to close. That's something that needs to be changed. Sent it back. Carrie Edwards, our engineering tech, looked at it, said, yes, you're absolutely right. Made that change. So now we need to have this ordinance amend the ordinance 2017-15. Seems like a lot of work, a lot of print for the misplacement of 1 or 2 letters. However, with that, we would appreciate it if the council would correct the city limits ordinance effective for 2018.
I knew we should have had the whole thing read out loud.
You certainly have that right if you choose not to waive the rule tonight.
Well, somebody other than I will read it, I can tell you that.
That's not gonna be me.
You know, actually, I told Gary it's got to be pretty impressive, whoever proofed it.
I know.
I mean, that was like the 4th page of these things in. I mean, my God, I'd shoot myself before I did that.
Also, don't you feel, isn't it nice to know someone's actually reading that carefully? Or
mean,
I'm not sure that's nice to
Yeah,
know. I don't
you
know.
just had an S that needed to be crossed out, basically.
Well, given that, I approve the attached ordinance amending the ordinance 2017-15 to correct an error in the legal description and establish a new legal description for the City of Moscow corporate limits under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and it be read by title and published by summary.
Second.
Okay.
I know.
We got a motion by Art and a second by Gina to approve the attached ordinance amending ordinance 2017-15 to correct an error in the legal description and establish a new legal description for the City of Moscow corporate limits under the suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read and titled by and published by summary. I'll start the roll with Ann.
Aye.
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 Okay, now I have a new ordinance to read on the amendments, which is ordinance 2018-04. Okay. An ordinance amending ordinance number 2017-15 of the City of Moscow, Idaho, establishing and declaring in this ordinance corporate limits of the City of Moscow, Latah County, Idaho, in accordance with the provisions of the laws of the State of Idaho relating to the establishment of the boundaries and the annexation or adjacent in contiguous territory, provided for the repeal of any or other ordinances or parts of ordinance in conflict therewithin, providing a severance and savings clause, and for the effective date of this ordinance. I gotta have a swig of water. Thank you, Gary, very much, and that ends our regular meeting, so we will go to reports, and I will start with you, Catherine. Oh, by the way, thank you for filling in as acting mayor for a week.
You're welcome, and I'm really glad I didn't. It was good that everything went really well. So I did get to sit in for you at the National Association of Retired and Active Federal Employees Luncheon. You know, Dan Pierce and 18 other people wanted to know more about fair and affordable housing. And we had, I showed them the website and took them to the fair and affordable housing website, told them to contact you as well. And so that was really nice. And they will invite you back at another time to talk
Awesome.
with them. Then I attended the Arts Commission, who always have a full agenda, and they have the Art Walk, artists. The photographer has been chosen. June 15th is when that starts. And they also have a poet laureate that they're going to announce at Art Walk, which is a big deal. They're very excited about that. And then they went through the list of things here. If you hadn't had an opportunity to go through the 3rd Street Gallery and notice all the Appaloosa Horse Museum paraphernalia, that opening I went to and participated in, which was really exciting. And then the farmers market, though they have a huge agenda, did not have a quorum last week, so they will catch up with everything this coming week.
Okay, very good. Arthur, welcome back.
Thank you. Hence, I have nothing for you.
Okay, well, go right down to Ann.
Yeah, I attended the Fair and Affordable Housing Commission meeting, and we actually received a presentation from the sixth grade class, one of them at Palouse Prairie Charter School, about Syringa, which was great, very well attended, and just fantastic to see them engaging with that. And we had a really surprising number of just community members come visit too. So they were talking about everything from tenants' rights and what they think that most renters are facing in the community. Some folks very concerned about the animals out at Syringa. And then the last topic of discussion was that they're planning a sort of a housing fair with the date to be determined, and they're really looking to talk to people about renting and then also first-time home buyers too. So they're thinking they'll bring in vendors like Moscow Building Supply, all kinds of different folks. And then planning and zoning met as well, and we received a presentation from Nils about tiny houses. So I guess Idaho passed an ordinance last year as well, or I guess an amendment to the code, and we're the first ones in the country to do so. And so he just basically talked about everything from zoning to cost. And I think it's worth noting that at the end of the presentation, he basically said that he had more discussions to have, but couldn't really advocate for the development of those because the cost doesn't really make sense. So they basically cost the same amount to build any other house. It's not less per square footage, and so it doesn't actually seem like a great solution for the community. So hopefully more information to come. And then there was a continuation on the topic of density, and the commission will be following the proposed revisions to cottage housing in Spokane. So cottage housing is housing that provides enhanced design and livability in a grouping of space, and basically it's clustered around outdoor space and developed with a coherent plan for the entire site. So we'll be watching that pretty closely to see how that plays out if they do end up passing it in Spokane and what effects it has.
How does that differ from a planned unit development?
That wasn't entirely clear to me either.
Oh.
I wonder about that as well. So, yeah, more information to come as we see how that plays out.
Very good. Gina?
The night after our last council meeting, I attended the Tree Commission, and they were all excited about their new member, Debbie Cadillac. She will actually join us next meeting. We talked a lot about the street tree planting guide. We're working through the last of it, and we're trying to make it both in color and not in color readable. You know, so if you want to look at a specific plant that's good for sun or whatever, then we want the icons to be easily read because of the budget and the tight parameters there. So we're working on that. We're talking about tree classes through Parks and Rec. And we were trying to decide which ones did well in the past and what we wanted to do. And it was kind of exciting. We've got a lot of resources for trees and arboriculture in Moscow. And it's fun to watch, who gets chosen and how we do it and that kind of thing. We're talking about the Arbor Day celebration, which I believe will be at Lena Whitmore. We're actually going to do some tree planting there this year. And we did talk, and we'll be going more into this at the next meeting. We're participating in the Parks and Rec Master Plan survey questions this year. We're going to put some questions in about trees and Moscow trees. And so there'll be more coming on that, but that was just getting our toes wet. And then the Thursday following our last council meeting, I went to the Transportation Commission, and we talked about some parking district revisions with the University of Idaho. There are about I want to say it was under 10 spaces that are changing, like categorization. And that's all I can tell you about it, that they will make a recommendation and bring it to city council. And then we are also speaking about Almond Street one-way configuration. Refresh me. I don't remember last.
Go back to two-way.
Going back to a two-way, and it was fairly complex, to be honest with you. It was right at the end of the meeting. We were all kind of hungry. Anyway,
Well, it has
that
to
will
do with
come.
that, the development that Bloom's looking in.
Right,
You know,
right.
off A Street, so that, yep, by the old Duma Seed, yes.
Yeah, and the development in that.
And actually,
that area.
the DMV too, at the other end.
So that's coming, but that's what happened in my two commissions.
Gina, did you say 10 spots?
I want to say
Roughly?
there were two areas, correct? It seemed like there were, it was along College, right, or Railroad, coming up to College, and there was some on College too.
There actually were 3 locations within the proposal, a
Yeah.
portion of College, a portion of 8th Street, and a portion of Railroad.
Yeah.
And the easterly portion was recommended to be removed from the proposal.
Yeah.
So it would be just the other 2 areas. Probably a little more than 10 spots, but yeah, less than 20 for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. It came up in the report, or the transportation report to P&Z, and I wondered how many spots.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jim?
Okay, last Thursday, I went to the Pollution Basin Aquifer Committee meeting, and we heard a great presentation from Professor John Bush about the underlying geology under Moscow and Pullman and how that affects water flow, and why under Moscow you can drill a well and get 10,000 gallons a minute, and halfway between here and Pullman you can't get enough water to supply one house. And it's because of the strata and the amount of sediments and basalt that is in there, and I don't want to go into the detail, but the graphs are available on the PBAC website if you're interested in how that flows and how water flows around, and why you can drill a well someplace and get water and why you can't someplace else. And it's very important for us to be identifying the resource that we have available as we move forward in terms of what we need to do to preserve it and stabilize those aquifers. And so they're doing some great work in terms of the research of that. And also they initiated testing of the water in the North Fork of the Palouse River in terms of what it would take to take the solids out of it and make it potable water. So there's a study going on about that as well, and information will be forthcoming.
Jim, that geologist you talked about, I got the chance at our water summit last October, spent about 45 minutes with him and he explained very interesting how that works. And I would encourage, and there'll be another water summit next October, it'd be great for all counselors to get a chance to go through that and really see that, because that is really amazing. You know, it's not like you think you got this bathtub full of water underneath of us, because you got all these shifting sediments and things going on all the time. And it's pretty amazing how they put that together. So.
Yeah, it's kind of an X-ray of the Earth, and
Yeah.
it's very difficult to see, and it's very complex.
Yeah, very complex.
Very complex. Also, last weekend I was able to go with the Moscow Volunteer Fire Department and climb the Columbia Tower in order to raise money for cancer research, which is very near and dear to my heart, because we lost a counselor that used to sit in this chair right here to that disease last year. And I want to thank everybody here that contributed to that, because we raised over $3 million in one day. And that should help us proceed.
I still owe you a $100 check for that. I got to send somewhere to
Yeah,
somebody. So you
I
need
got
to
a
come
couple
shake
of
me down.
Italian guys that are going to come around and,
I need-
and collect.
Come over and buy a couple of pepperonis from me and say, lighten up a little bit on me.
But so thank you all for participating in that. It's a wonderful event, and it's great to be able to talk to have time to spend with the fire department people, with the volunteers, and see what their life's like, and show some appreciation for what they do. Also, while I was in Seattle, got to sample the bike share situation over there. And I don't know if everybody's familiar, but the city of Seattle put together a bike share that had a docking system, and they spent millions of dollars on it, and it was a total failure. And so now they have independent private companies. There's 3 of them that operate in Seattle, and there's no docking. You use your phone. Technology's been a big part of this, but you can use your phone to get a bike and it unlocks it and you ride it to wherever you want and you just leave it there. And then they're all electronically chipped. And then, so since Seattle, everything tends to go down towards the waterfront, in the morning they come around with a van and pick up all the bikes and take them to the top of the hill. And then people ride them back and they pick them up again the next day and bring them back. And so there's bikes in front of every tavern and every business, and you just get on one and ride it wherever you want to go. And it seems like that is a system that could work very well for here. So
I just wanted to ask you, did you try any of the disposable helmets, the ones made out of cardboard that are sold?
I didn't see that. There were no, all these bikes are sitting around, there's no helmets, and it's pretty low speed situation on the bike path there. It's not a.
Well, it's worth checking into because you can wear them 6 to 8 times, and you can buy them. They're collapsible, and then they expand out, and you put them on.
Yeah, I've seen those, but I didn't see a vending situation for those
Interesting.
down on the waterfront or anywhere. Also, they have two-way bike paths in central Seattle, which we're talking about putting in, and they seem to be quite effective and well used in a fairly high-speed situation on some of those hills. And I saw people riding bicycles with 3 children on the back of a bike. I've never seen a bike like that, using the two-way bike lane to transport their kids to school, and commuters coming into the city on bicycles using that two-way thing, and how well it worked for them to negotiate traffic way faster than the cars could. So
Were they protected? Was it a protected?
yes,
Yeah.
it's a protected lane. And a lot of it's protected like we're planning on doing it with the icicle barriers and the small barriers that a car could drive over if they were intent on doing so, but probably wouldn't, and they also have signals that have a bicycle in them at intersections, so that whether it's red or green or yellow for the bike, not just the car. So it's specific.
That's cool.
Not that we need that, but we could get there at some point in the future. So I'm hoping that our consultant on that project will have solved all these problems, and we'll get that underway by the time the bridge is finished. That's all I have.
Randy?
I don't have anything to report. I participated in a webinar about RC&Ds kind of nationally, like a success stories in states all across the country. There was a tri-state involving Oregon and California. Just some examples of success stories and how to bring in nonprofits and for them to be aware of, and there were some interesting, one of the projects was really about a huge water supply issue. So I'm just educating myself about that, and I will have my first meeting with the Clearwater RC&D this week. So this is my big week for
meetings.
Yes, it is.
Very good. Well, last week, I was gone for a week. Thank you very much, Kathy, for being acting mayor.
And Gina, as well as Gary, we were in National League of Cities in Washington, D.C. Gosh, went to a ton of meetings. I'm not going to go through every one of them because I don't want to keep everybody here till midnight. But one of the themes of the National League of Cities this year was about infrastructure. Huge conversation about infrastructure. Every city, every state is faced with it. And I will tell you this, president of the National League of Cities is the mayor from Little Rock, Arkansas. His name is Mark Stodola. And Mark spoke in his comments about the city of Little Rock in the 2010 consensus population. There was 193,524 people. They are $1 billion in need of infrastructure. Think about that, $1 billion, and that floored me to hear that. And that's all infrastructure, and that can be everything from broadband infrastructure to streets, to sewage, to water, to transit, busing, and all these things. But I was really, we need like $12 million. I felt pretty good about things, in relationship to that. But the infrastructure thing, there was a bunch of infrastructure meetings and seminars to deal with water, surface water throughout, as well as roads and all kinds of other things, Brandy and Jim and the rest of you. And I went to one of those seminars, very, very interesting. One of the good things about going to D.C. was getting a chance to meet with the Department of Transportation. Gary and I went there on Tuesday. met with the deputy, the secretary, Ms. Chin, and really got some great information. Actually got some information about a new infra grant process that's going to be coming up here in about 3 months. And they were very cordial about telling us, boy, to jump on that. And we also asked about Tiger grants. You know, what's the status of Tiger grants? Are they going to go away? Are they going to still be here? They are still going to be here. And they suggested that we continue going after Tiger grants as well as these other grants, even though our Tiger grant got denied just right before we went. Interestingly, though, and I told Gary this, if we keep fishing, eventually we will get a chance to snag a big fish out of this thing. Interesting thing for us is we were the only people from the state of Idaho that was there seeing them, and that's the kind of stuff that we need to be able to do. And oh, by the way, that deputy, Jim, was a mountain biker, and he was big into mountain biking and all this and that. I told him, I said, hey, I got a guy, you come on out, we'll take you on some hell-raising spots, buddy. I mean, the hills in D.C. are nothing. I mean, they're like a hump. You know, they're like what we fixed out here at the Corner Club last summer. That guy, that's a hill of those folks. I said, I got a guy who could take you on Moscow Mountain. And I thought and he got kind of a kick out of that. So you never know. This guy had a trip one time flying to Coeur d'Alene and fell through, so I invited him. So you never know about relationships like that. But we also met with Senator Risch, talked to him about a number of different things. Senator Crapo was not in his office, but we talked to Charles, his lead person there, as well as we saw Representative Labrador and Representative Simpson. Even though Mike Simpson is not in our district, he's always been very, very friendly to us and always has time to talk to us about issues and different things. And then there was just a number of different seminars, which I said I won't go into because of time, but I wanted to share that information with you. So, Gary.
You've done a great job on National League of Cities. I have nothing further.
Okay, with that, I would entertain adjournment, folks. Let's go. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? We are out of here, folks, at 9:29. Thank you, everybody.